Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are so delighted to have you here for our second virtual Think and Drink. I'm Hannah. I am our Communications and Strategy Director. And I'm going to pass it over to Doug to welcome us, Doug Welsh, who is the chair of our board of directors. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm Doug Welsh. I'm the head of coffee and sustainability at Peet's Coffee, and I'm also the current chair of World Coffee Research. I have been on the board since the inception of this amazing organization. I'm actually about to go off the board, which will test the proposition that I will be a supporter of WCR forever. But I'll get to that in just a second. First, I want to make a special welcome to our new members, Nadia, Hope, Nanda, and we have a couple of new committee members as well. It's part of an organization that it has been a joy to be a part of. Why does WCR matter? Because it's about coffee. And coffee matters to you if you're on this webinar. But I want to suggest that WCR is the fundamental sustainability investment in your portfolio. Without it, your support of the people in coffee, of coffee communities, can't happen. We got to have coffee first. We have a fundamental obligation, actually, to modernize this crop. Will surprise some of you to learn that coffee is not the only crop in the world. There are many others, and almost all of them, the ones, have better funded and more modern research. And all we're doing is catching up a little with the expert help of the folks you're going to hear from next. We have a tradition at WCR, a little think and drink that we usually have at a convention in person. So that's why we're asking you what you're drinking. And it's been a pleasant diversion from the conference in the past, and we present and update you on our programs. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. Shortly, I'm going to turn it over to Vern. But first, I want to welcome you again and invite you to join us next year in person in Boston. We'll see you then.
Thank you, Doug. And welcome everyone to our Think and Drink of 2021. We're really excited that you're here joining us today. And I'll share with you some of the information from our work and what we've been thinking about. So I'm Vern Long. I'm the CEO of World Coffee Research. And I'm so excited that this will hopefully be our last virtual Think and Drink, and that we'll get to see you in person, as Doug mentioned, in Boston next year. So what I wanted to do today was to set the framework for some of the thinking we've been doing and how we're helping provide the support to the community as these big global challenges are swirling around us. Recognizing that it's a little glitchy with my video on, I'm going to turn my video off, but I just wanted to say hi and so you could see my face, and then I'll turn my video off, but keep going. So as you know, the COP26 is upon us. And just to give you a sense of why that matters and what that is, for those of you who are not following it, on a daily basis, this conference is actually a really important moment. It's the first meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to be held since the Paris Agreement took over. So it's also the first major UN environmental meeting to be held in person since the beginning of the pandemic. So this event, the COP26, is a moment when many governments will come together to communicate what they're doing to respond to the climate emergency. And that's why it's so important. So I just wanted to offer, for those of you who would like to be able to be a little more in detail on this as it goes forward, there's just a great reporting service. It's called IISD, the Earth Negotiations Bulletin. And they have folks on the ground continuously reporting on it and telling you what's happening, what's important, how to understand where the negotiations are going. So I just wanted to offer that for folks who are really interested and curious about this and why it matters so much. The IISD reporting is a really helpful tool to keep track of what's happening as it goes on. So when we think about, climate change in coffee in particular, you know, there are some major reports that have come out. So in August, there was an important report that came out from the IPCC regarding the physical basis of climate change, and it's indisputable. The evidence is just really strong now about the association between emissions and the consequences to our climate. In February and March of next year, there will be a couple of reports that are coming out both on adaptation and mitigation that we will be monitoring and watching for all of you to help you make sense of what those big reports are saying. And so we'll talk a bit later about some of our global leadership activities, but this is a space where we are happy to bring you and curate that information to, make it actionable and relevant to our community as we go forward. So we realize that there are some major challenges facing us, but we also realize that bringing that science to you is a big part of what WCR is about, and explaining it and helping us make sense of the information and bringing you expertise from the community to really help us wrestle with these big questions and how we can all contribute to change. As we look at the big picture for supply chains in coffee, we realize that there are major challenges in producing countries, and it's everything from infrastructure, roads and bridges, getting coffee from producing areas to ports, and the challenges of rising sea levels. All of that infrastructural challenge is huge and bigger certainly than anything that WCR or individual organizations can do. But we also realize that within this big picture of supply chain stability and big questions of supply, we realize that there are some really important questions that agricultural R&D need to contribute. So we realize that this is a really big issue, but we know that for producers, climate change is a very, very threatening and risky challenge. So we feel that deeper agricultural R&D investments are really critical at this moment, because farmers are facing challenges of production that exceed their own individual capacity to adapt. New technology is going to be required. And that's what we seek to do, is to mobilize that investment alongside the kinds of investments that others are going to have to make for these, the bigger systemic components of responding to climate change, like infrastructure. Agricultural R&D is a critical investment and tool in mitigating risk and enabling farmers to thrive and be resilient. There was a great analysis undertaken by the World Bank, released in 2019, on harvesting prosperity, and it shows the effect of the investments in agricultural research have been tremendously successful at driving down poverty, improving quality of life, and ensuring food security for millions. And so it is along this line that we allocate our time and effort focusing on ag R&D to really bring that benefit to the producer community and to the broader supply chain. So we like to think of this as harvest time. There have been so many programs that we have been running for the last 10 years. This is our 10th anniversary as an organization. And this is the moment when we get to reap the rewards of all the hard work that folks have undertaken. You'll see that we've had tremendous work in nurseries. If you have been to some of our other events, particularly in Central America through the MOCA program, led by TechnoServe and supported by the US Department of Agriculture, that program on nurseries has been tremendously important for ensuring that farmers can access high quality, healthy, genetically pure plants to improve their sustainability for the long term. So this nursery work, the breeding programs, the trials of F1 hybrids as we move that program forward and understand how to best support farmers with these technologies and the innovation pipelines. This is the work that we'll continue to do in the years and months ahead. I wanted to give a quick overview of where we've come from. So as you know, we had a global consultation that many of you participated in the early part of 2020, and which led to our 5-year strategy. That strategy process was a really important moment of reflection. So not only have we been harvesting the fruits of the labors of the organization, it was also a time to prune. And for those of you who are very familiar with production in the field, you have to tend your plots, you have to weed them, and you have to prune your trees to get the greatest productivity for the long term. So as we thought through our programs, we had to make some really difficult decisions around what is the most effective return on investment for our investors and for the farmers who benefit from the work that we undertake with our national partners. And this led to the closing of the on-farm trials, the Global Coffee Monitoring Program, as a result of that deep analysis internally of how we could drive the greatest value for our partner network and also ensure that our investments as a global organization are catalytic and really take advantage of our global positioning, as we know that a lot of the work at Origin is really best done by most of the folks at Origin who are really familiar with the specific context at the country level or the subnational level. And so when we think about our work going forward, we're looking to make sure that WCR is catalytic and supportive to national partners and that we're not duplicative or working in parallel. We really want to support the on-the-ground teams that are working in the National Coffee Institutes, in partner organizations that are really committed to helping support farmers and bring innovation to them. And we really want to make sure that we can bridge the science, the upstream science and technology and capacity in some of the areas that George will be talking about in a moment to really drive value for National Coffee Institutes and the broad community of farmers that they are servicing, as well as the nursery work that is through partnerships across the board. So as I tee up this rocket that we're launching, I wanted to turn it over to George, who will take us through some of this work and what it means that we're talking about the rocket. So over to you, George, to tell us more about this rocket launch. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Vern. I'll introduce myself, then I'll take myself off the screen to save some bandwidth on this. My name is George Kotch. I come out of industry, out of the seed companies, and then I've gone into international agriculture working with the CGIAR. I brought all those talents and experience, and hopefully we're going to make some good improvements within coffee research, and hopefully I could demonstrate that over the next 10 slides that I've been asked to present. So right now I'm going to take myself off the screen and just listen to the presentations. So you can look at this slide right in front of us. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. And you can look at that and say, though, you can look at it as the glass half empty or half full. In my case, in many cases, we did slow down, and we are now planting a seed of a global breeding network now, but we're coming with it with significantly more technology than there was 20 years ago. So my hope is that we can introduce all the technologies from other crops into coffee so that we can actually accelerate the gains from selections faster than we've ever could before. So why breeding? Okay, so I guess I'm always struck with the fact that if you're going to remodel a kitchen, that you should always be buying the newest and best appliances for that kitchen that would allow you to maximize the aesthetics of the kitchen or the productivity of the kitchen. In many ways, if you look at what's going to happen over the next 20 and 30 years within coffee, we're going to go through an optimization program with the farmers optimizing the way they manage things. And so in order to maximize the changes in management of the farm, you're going to need new varieties, the varieties that are fit for those management changes. And so you don't want to go back to looking at varieties that were used 50 and 100 years ago. You want to be able to select varieties that are maximizing the productivity and the quality of these changes within the program. And so my hope is that I'd be able to convince you that the approach that we're going to have regarding this global breeding network is going to bring advances to the national programs and therefore the farmers in developing productivity and quality, durable rust resistance over time. So where does coffee breeding happen? Coffee breeding happens in the national programs, and each national programs is in tune to the needs of the production within each one of those countries. If roasters want to continue to buy coffee outside the big three over the next 20 plus years, the variety development within these national programs need to be mobilized. WCR's role in maximizing in this global breeding program initiative is to maximizing the productivity of the national programs. So we're here to support the national programs. We're not here to compete against the national programs. And that is a significant thing you'll see as I go on and explain a little bit of our national programs. A lot of times the national programs are under-resourced, or they may not have the best tools available to them. And one of the reasons why we're thinking more globally and acting more locally is we think we can bring additional resources and maximize and leverage the needs of all the breeding programs to create common tools that would benefit everyone. The breeding program network that is being launched within WCR is about creating global populations that will be distributed regionally among a number of our partners with this. And this global program is going to be developed from what we call a foundation, from a factory system, and then it's going to be rolled out to the different breeding programs in which we are partnering with. The advantage of doing something like this is that it maximizes the number of environments in which we can evaluate our genetics, and by maximizing the number of environments and feeding that data back into a centralized system, we would be able to then maximize the effectiveness of our selection of this material on a global level. If you're looking for yield adaptation or stability or rust durability, but it also provides the national programs with populations in which they will be able to develop material for their own production region or production country. So the goal of doing this is that we will create every 3 to 5 years new populations that will be distributed globally. The data will come back, but we're underpinning this with technologies that we're now launching from other crops, or that have been used in other crops. And this is something like the SNP technology that we recently communicated to the global coffee community over the last 2 or 3 days. One of the real values that was brought by WCR, and one of the ways we were able to look at germplasm both across different environments and the depth of our environments, was our IMLVT, which is our International Multi-Location Variety Trials. We were able to develop this global breeding network because of the information we gained from the multi-location variety trials. And this was critical because for the first time, we were able to evaluate varieties over multiple locations of agroecological zones. And the importance of that is some of these agroecological zones have never seen these varieties before. And when we did the analysis, we were able to gain which varieties are potential parents for our global breeding program, and which locations would be critical locations to differentiate the genetics of our breeding program. So significance of the IMLVT is going to last a lot longer than the trial themselves, because it is the foundation in which we'll build the national or the international breeding network, because we'll know which varieties to use as parents, what good genetics is apply across all the environments, and which varieties and which locations are best to be utilized to differentiate this genetics. So it all comes back to this model of cooperation, thinking globally, acting locally. So the national programs do a really good job breeding, but by breeding for new coffee varieties. But if we begin to think as a group, where we come together and work on common problems, in common ways of thinking, using SNP technology spread across all of the different national programs, it maximizes the need for this technologies and minimizes the cost of this technologies. So we're implementing this concept called Coopetation, where we all work together to solve basic issues, and then each one of the national programs will have that technology and those breeding populations that will allow them to develop varieties for their own location. So it's a concept of thinking globally and working globally to maximize the resources that we have, but yet then each one of the national programs have their own breeding program in which to develop their own platform of new varieties going forward. The way it worked out, it can be spelled out in this particular environment. We have one large factory location. We hope to have that factory location in Central America. From that factory location, we will be developing all the populations. The populations, or the set of populations, will be distributed in 7 different environments. From the IMLVT, we've selected the 7 environments based upon cooperation of the IMLVT hosts, the environments that will differentiate the genetics, the rust pressure, stability of yield. And so we've selected these 7 different environments to hopefully differentiate these germplasm that we've created. And the germplasm, or the genetics that we've created, was based upon the sources of, or the results of the IMLVT data that we've collected over these 5-6 years. From that, what we'll be doing is we'll be distributing these on a national basis, but then when we get the data back from each one of the nations, we'll be able to apply marker technology to better understand which genes or which genetics work best across the multiple environments. This is really the only way you could do this, by looking at multiple environments and then looking at the genetics, underpinning genetics that are successfully optimized in each one of the environments. And so one national program would be hard-pressed to do that. When you combine the resources and the collaborations of multiple national programs, it allows us to do more with less. And that's one of the whole goals of the Coopetation model, thinking globally, acting locally, in underpinning with technologies that are proven in other crops. Whenever I talk about technology, people immediately go to GMO. And so what I wanted to assure you was that this is not GMO technology. Basically, what we're trying to do is look at the genetic markers within the DNA, and and it allows us to peek into the plant's genetics. Because what we can do is look at the genetics of each one of the plants that we plant, which are going to be plus 3,000 plants spread throughout the world, and we'll look at which ones are the performers and which ones are not performers. We'll then look at the genetics underpinning the performers versus the non-performers, and we'll clearly begin to see which genetics works across the globe, which doesn't, which gives you durable rust resistance, which gives you the components of better cup quality, and where you get better yield stability. And this allows us to maximize the resources we have, thinking globally rather than thinking as a single program. So at the end of the day, what does this deliver? Well, it's going to do a number of things. We're going to take the benefits and the successes of what occurred in the excellence in breeding platform within the CG, and we're going to take those proven methods and move them into this global breeding network. This will allow us to begin to look at more demand-led breeding, meaning that what the client or the market wants, and incorporate that into our breeding strategies and our breeding targets. This will allow us to maximize the technologies that are out there and make them cheaper for us to run. And so right now we're in the process of launching a medium density SNP platform that is going to be able to be utilized by all national programs and private companies working within coffee breeding for the benefit of bringing better quality product to the grower. So it begins to it begins to allow us to maximize these resources by taking the technology that many of us couldn't afford to implement locally and begin to allow us to begin to look at this globally. And so at the end of the day, what we'll deliver is we'll be delivering expanded genetic diversity from elite and exotic materials globally. And this material will come from all corners of the world and will allow us to multiply and assure genetic diversity so that that roasters have the ability to get product from other regions besides the big three. So I hope that I was able to demonstrate that this new way of thinking will allow us to uplift and support the national breeding programs, allow us to interfuse technology that we couldn't afford, and will take the modern proven methods of delivering products to the market so that we can all benefit over the next 20 to 30 years as we develop this breeding program for the long term. Hanna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, George. I'm Hanna. I introduced myself at the beginning, but for anybody who missed it, I am our Director of Communications and Strategy. Vern and George have told us a little bit about kind of what's coming and where we've been. I want to take a moment to look back over the last year and a half. It's been a year and a half since we had our last Think and Drink, and talk to you a little bit about some of the exciting progress that we've made in our existing programs. Which we continue to build on and run and continue to inform the planning for the future. So without further ado, I'm going to run you through some fun stuff. So George talked to you about breeding and our very exciting, the launch of this breeding network, which we're moving forward with in 2022. But we do a lot of other work besides breeding. We have these 4 program areas: breeding, trials, nurseries, and global leadership. And I'm going to talk to you about a couple of the things that we've been doing in some of these other areas over the last year or so. So trials, many of you are familiar with our F1 hybrid program. This was the sort of first foray that we made into breeding. We created a number of F1 hybrid crosses back in 2015, and they have been in field trials since then, growing and maturing, and eventually, in recent years, producing a harvest that we have now been able to evaluate both in the field and in the cup. So we have had the wonderful opportunity to send some of these materials out to a huge range of folks from the industry, cuppers, many of them Q graders, most of them Q graders, both in the US and Europe and Asia. Over the last 2 years, we've included 60 cuppers, or more than that, actually, many more cuppers from 60 companies that have had a chance to give us feedback on these materials. And this is really critical to us. It's a huge part of what we see our role in being, is sort of being a bridge and connecting the work that's happening in the field and a lot of the decisions that are feeding into breeding decisions around how a variety performs in ways that are really important for farmers, right? Like yield, disease and pest resistance, et cetera. But then also making sure that those varieties, any ones that ultimately do make their way to the market, are also meeting market demand, that they are varieties that buyers would want to buy. And it's really important to do that early in the process so that you don't end up investing a tremendous amount of time and effort into creating something that ultimately doesn't have a market. So it's been really fun to work on this with folks. I just wanted to give you a teeny tiny taste of some of the analysis that we've done. There's much more that you can see in a RICO talk that we did this year that will eventually, the video will be released at some point. And we're going to come back to the community in January with a lot more analysis as well. But this is just one teeny peek. When we took all the data that we had on cupping, which is, I think, from 7 different distinct harvests from some of our different sites over a couple of years, and we combined it all and looked at the cup scores for some of these hybrids against what we call field controls. So these are existing varieties that we know have good performance in the field, or they're standard for farmers in that region. We were very gratified, excited to see that a couple of them were performing well in the cup. They were also performing well in the field. And so we are going to be advancing these 2 top candidates. You don't have to understand this graph. It's just to show you that there's a plan. We're going to be advancing them to larger scale pre-commercial trials. We're doing we're propagating the hybrids now. It's a process. It takes a little while. So these trials are going to go into the field in 2023. We are looking at probably 32 trials that will be executed in partnership with both national programs, but also with local partners who have a field presence in these countries where the varieties may end up ultimately being released. And the point of this is, again, as always, to see, right? Our early results are promising, we're excited, but at the end of the day, we have to check and make sure that these varieties are actually performing better than what farmers already have access to, the sort of next best thing. Otherwise, there's really no reason for farmers to take a risk on something new. And so that's what this next round of trials will do, is really look in more detail at how these varieties are performing, and do they perform better than across a range of environments in a number of different kinds of farms, and see, are they really delivering an improvement for farmers before they would be advanced for commercial release. The other thing that we're going to be doing next year is a risk study around hybrids. So we know that hybrids have a tremendous amount of promise. They can produce higher yields. They can maintain good cup quality while also being resistant to rust, things that used to be considered sort of trade-offs. So that's all very exciting. But we also know that they can pose a risk for farmers. Especially for farmers that are used to saving seed, you should not save the seed of hybrid plants, because the plants will segregate, and the next generation of plants will not be uniform and will not have the performance that farmers expect. And that's very different than how a lot of coffee farmers typically run their farms. Right now, seed saving is the predominant way of propagating new plants on a farm. And so before releasing these materials, we want to understand better that landscape and what kinds of things could be put into place to help mitigate that risk and ensure that farmers aren't exposing themselves to unnecessary risk, because that would be counterproductive. So that's some fun stuff on our F1 hybrid program. George mentioned our international multi-location variety trial. This is our oldest trial. It is one of the very first things we got off the ground when we started back in 2012. The first plants went into fields in 2015. And this is, just as a refresher, our trial where we have 31 varieties collected from all over the world. So these are existing commercially available varieties. And we put them on research stations with our partners in national programs in 17 countries. I think there's 24 sites in 17 countries across a range of environments. Some you can see in one of the pictures, very hot and dry site in Zambia, hotter, cooler, wetter, etc. These trials are in a big range of environments. We now have a lot of data, which is very exciting. The trials all went in at different times. So you can see this is basically just a schematic showing you that we are roughly in a phase right now where a large number of the trials have matured. They're producing harvests, and we're able to start cupping the coffees. And some of the trials are going to start closing down eventually, or transitioning down once we have multiple years of harvest data from them. So it's very exciting. We're sort of at this tipping point right now where we're starting to see a lot of data flow in. We can begin to really analyze that data at a global, but also at a country level. And that's what we're doing. So for each country's trials, we are working with our, again, national partners to provide analysis back to them about which of the varieties in the trial are performing well in their environments. Some of our partners are then taking that information and either using it to expand the trial with certain varieties. So they may take really a subsection of the higher performing varieties and be putting new trials in to test whether they may work for commercial release for farmers. And some are pursuing access to some of those varieties that weren't commercially available in their countries before. At the same time, we're doing global analysis, which is helping us learn all kinds of things. And George alluded to some of them. It has really helped us understand what would be really helpful environments for us to use to test materials from the new breeding program. Some of the varieties that are in this trial, because we do now have quite a lot of data on them, we're also using as the basis for the first round of crosses for that breeding program. They're becoming part of that first population. So it's all very exciting. This is just one little piece of analysis to give you a flavor of what we're doing and what we're looking at. As we analyze sort of both field performance and performance in the cup, one of the things that is most important and exciting about this trial is that we have these varieties in so many environments. And that is a really good proxy for, or a really good tool for helping us prepare for climate change. Because across all these environments all over the world, we see the kind of variability that you might get over many years going into the future. So we have trials in places that are today have a climate that's similar to what may become more common climates for some regions in the future. So by seeing how those varieties respond and perform today, we can begin to understand what varieties are doing well across and hold stability of performance across a lot of environments. And this slide is just talking about that stability piece, which is really, really important for climate resilience. If you have a variety that is really high yielding in one place, but really terrible in another, that's a good indication that it doesn't have that stability that you would want to help be resilient in the face of climate change. And you can see that in these graphs. So we have some varieties that are really, really, really high yielding in some places, but are not very stable. They don't have good performance across lots of environments. And some that are really, really stable, but are maybe not the very best performers in a particular environment. And so we look at stability not only for yield, but also for cup quality. So just a taste of some of the analysis that we're doing. We're going to be doing a lot of cupping from this trial network over the next year or two. This is just a small example from a local cupping that happened at our Peru site. We are in the process right now of collecting a subset of varieties from 7 countries that will go out for what we call a genetics by environment quality analysis to cuppers all over the world. And that'll be happening later this year and into next year, and we'll do it again next year as well. So we're very excited to be at the point where we have enough cherry from these trials that we can start collecting not just field performance data, but also cup performance data. Nurseries. So many of you have heard us talk a lot, especially in recent years, about the work that we are increasingly doing in this area of nurseries and seed value chains and seed systems. And the reason why we expend so much effort here is because it does not matter if you have created the best variety in the world if farmers don't have access to it and if they can't get good quality seed. And this is a real challenge and a real bottleneck in coffee. We're not alone in this. It's a challenge for many crops in many places. But this is one of those places where we can look to work that has been done in other crops and see what some of the options for solutions are. We know that it matters a lot because having unhealthy plants or having plants that are not the plant that you think they are can expose farmers to a tremendous amount of risk. This is just a small example slide that's really striking. This is a farm in Brazil, and on one side, on the left side of the photo, you can see a farm that's a plot that's planted with varieties that are not resistant to rust, and on the other side, ones that are resistant to rust. And clearly there's been a significant outbreak on this farm. So if you think that you have a rust-resistant variety and it turns out that you don't, that the seed wasn't pure or whatever, that it can destroy your farm. And so this is one of the reasons why we focus so much on this this element of seed health, seed purity, and ensuring that we have better tools in place at a global level for the community around that. And one of the most exciting things that we've done over the last year is working on this project together with many partners, in particular scientists from the USDA, but also with the collaboration of many, many countries supplying their varieties for us to build a big database. We have created, USDA really has created this, this tool that allows us to check the DNA, do variety identification and assurance work for much, much, much lower cost than was available before. It used to cost about $130 to test a single leaf sample. We are able to bring that price down significantly. And this is a tool that will be able to be used both by nurseries to check, do I really have the variety I think I have, to help clean up seed lots, and we're actively using it in this way right now. And also that will be used in the breeding program. So it is a really essential component of being able to do the kind of genomic selection process that underpins the breeding network. We couldn't launch that program without this tool. And just as an example of how exciting this is, we have scientists and breeders from every coffee country participating, almost every coffee country participating in helping us build this tool. It is something that did not exist before. The Brazilians didn't build it themselves. They're very excited to participate with us in this. So just a really exciting example of a global public good that matters for everybody, that's going to enable the whole industry to move forward. We're actively using the tool right now. We've done a lot of assessments of seed lots. Seed lots, for anyone who's unfamiliar, you produce seed, the seed goes to nurseries, nurseries grow them into little plants, and those are ultimately sold to farmers. So it matters that the seeds, the original plants, the little babies, are what you think they are. And so we've done a lot of assessment, visiting a lot of seed lots in Central America, and looked at a lot of plants, and we've been able to confirm what we more or less, anecdotally had understood before, which is that there are a lot of problems with traceability in the seed system in coffee broadly. It's a problem everywhere. So we found that only 28.6% in 2020 of the 63 seed lots that we visited, and this is with production capacity for over 25 million plants, only 28% were actually pure. We're doing more assessments in 2021 in Central America, and in 22, we are using this tool to help support a national renovation program in El Salvador, and also a big project in Uganda to assure farmers, to check for that plants being sold in nurseries are indeed resistant to coffee wilt disease, which is a really significant problem for Robusta production. Getting access to coffee wilt disease resistant plants, there was a recent study that showed that it can increase farmer income by $250, which is really significant. Just having this variety, right? And so just being able to get it and have it and know that that's what it is in and of itself can significantly change farmer incomes. So, and finally, our final kind of program area is global leadership. And this is kind of a new area for us. So we're just beginning to explore kind of how we work in this way. And we welcome everybody's feedback on this as we kind of figure out how we want to structure this program. But the first two things, big things that we've done this year or are doing, we're still in process, is bringing together experts that can help address critical questions that are relevant for this kind of R&D lens that the community has. So when we did our large global consultation, it was really clear that there are a couple of subject areas that are that people have a lot of interest and curiosity around. Productivity, the relationship between productivity and profitability being one, and carbon emissions, scope 3 emissions, carbon footprints is another. So this year we were able to work with a couple of really awesome, exciting experts to commission some research and some reviews to help orient the community and contribute, hopefully, some new insights around these topics. So we had a webinar last week with Dr. Rocco Macchiavello and Dr. Davide Del Prete about this, with the presented new analysis using a tremendous, incredible data set from Enveritas, kind of real-time data from coffee farms all over the world to look at this question of whether or not significant increases in productivity impact global price and what the trade-offs there are. And so if you missed that, I encourage you to check out the recording. It was a really interesting talk. And then coming up, not next week, but the week after, we're going to present a white paper from Dr. Ratan Lal, who was the 2020 World Food Prize winner. He's a preeminent soil scientist who has done a review of the carbon accounting tools that exist for coffee and thinking about some of the things that they're missing, in particular soil organic carbon and biomass, and how current tools, by not accounting for these things, are not giving us accurate carbon footprint estimates for coffee. So we encourage you to join us for that. You can register. There's a link in the chat box in advance if you're interested in checking that out. And that will also be accompanied by a white paper that we release in a couple weeks. The other thing that we have done more and more of over the last year is advocacy. So we recognize, as Vern said at the top, that the challenges that are facing coffee and coffee production and coffee research are bigger than any one organization can tackle, and require the mobilization of a tremendous amount of funding. And so we have been working in close partnership with, for example, coffee farmers in Hawaii to help advance legislation that would increase funding for pest and disease research on coffee. This is, it would be a US legislation, but it would benefit farmers all over the world. It would unlock a lot of resources for driving forward research on many coffee diseases and pests, all coffee diseases and pests. Similarly, FFAR, which is another kind of US public institution that does science funding, just announced a large grant that's going to help contribute to the sequencing of the coffee rust genome. An old collaborator of ours, Dr. Kathy Amy, is helping lead that project. This is really, really important basic research that will impact ultimately coffee breeding and all the sort of things that we touch. It's very big and expensive work. And so we recognize that we can't do it all ourselves. And so by helping kind of mobilize interest and effort and helping focus for example, the US government's lenses on what are the most relevant, important topics that need funding in coffee research, we can kind of by working together increase the total amount of funding that's going toward research to solve some of these really important problems. Another really interesting and related problem is this issue of coffee germplasm and coffee genetic diversity. We know from lots of different studies, including ones that we've contributed to ourselves, that that our protections for coffee germplasm are not adequate. So there have been a number of sort of studies. There's going to be a new germplasm bank in Hawaii, which is exciting. We have recently helped Cote d'Ivoire digitize their coffee collection. So it used to be, if you wanted to know what plants were in Cote d'Ivoire's coffee germplasm bank, you would have to fly to Cote d'Ivoire and go visit it and, ask the guy and look on the piece of paper. We've been able to help them get those collections digitized so that any scientist in the world can look at what those collections hold, and hopefully begin to work with some of those materials. So a little taste of some of what we're doing. I'm going to pass it over to, actually, I'm going to pause. I'm going to pause for questions. I'm going to go back. So let me come back here. So if you have questions, there's a couple of them that might be in the Q&A panel. I invite you to ask any questions that you have. And I can see that there's one or two in here. So I am going to bring them up. Okay, so Doug asked, does purity of lines matter that much? George, I'm going to throw that one to you. This is, I think this is a question referring to new varieties. And we talked about seed lot purity. And, I alluded to the fact that it's a problem. But George, do you want to hop in?
We underestimate the importance of actually being able to manage the product. And the only way you can manage the product is to make sure that the variety that you're working with is uniform and breeding true. So these are really critical. And this is a basic step that all crops do when they go through this modernization program, is that the first thing they do is to make sure that the varieties that are being released are true to type, because that allows you for better management throughout the whole value chain. So it's really critically important. And what we're doing right now with this low cost platform is really valuable in cleaning this up right now.
Yeah, and I'll just add maybe an example. So the example from Uganda. So in this project that we're working on to help verify whether varieties are resistant to coffee wilt disease or not. So if you have a variety that has a certain trait or characteristic like disease resistance, and the lines aren't pure or they become too contaminated, those traits will not be present anymore, or they will be compromised. And when they're really important traits like disease resistance, and a farmer's counting on not having a disease present on his farm, right, it can dramatically impact income. So, right, because if a disease shows up and you weren't planning on it, you now have to manage for that disease, which can be very, very costly. Or it can just destroy your crop, which is also, of course, very costly. So it does matter a lot for maintaining the integrity and performance of varieties that have specific traits that you're looking for. So there's another question here about the kind of continuity of the breeding program, and will WCR be making new crosses, in particular new F1 hybrids, going forward into the future? George, do you want to take that one too?
So that will soon be determined by the board. We're looking at the risk and reward of hybrids, and by far the hybrids out yield the pure lines, but there's also a risk about that. If we do go into the developing of hybrids, we'll design the breeding program so you can now begin to select the parents to even make the hybrids more higher performing than what we're currently doing. Currently, what we're doing is we're just taking one plant and crossing it to another one. There's a whole system in which you could actually improve that breeding scheme. So we're waiting on the board. We're going to look at how the performance is at this point. When we launch that breeding program, it can go one of two ways. We can do developing pure lines, or we can put our energies into developing more designed hybrids at this point. So the jury's still out on that.
Awesome. One more question about the difference between our previous multi-location variety trials and our future trials, and how they differ. And I'll start, and if anybody else wants to jump in, you can do that. So the main difference in the previous multi-location trials is that they were testing existing varieties. So these were commercially available varieties, at least in some place they were available. So for example, we had varieties from India that were that are commercially available for farmers in India, but then we're testing them in places where they're not commercially available for farmers, like Nicaragua. So we put together a big basket of varieties from all over the world that are existing. They're grown on farms every day, and we're looking at their performance across a large number of environments. What's new about the breeding network that we described is that they are not going to be commercially available varieties. They will be new crosses, and we'll be looking at a lot of different new crosses from this big population that George described and how they perform in multiple environments, with the ultimate goal being not just to see, which ones might be released for farmers, and countries will be able to do that. They'll be able to look at performance in this population and see if they want to select varieties for eventual release, for trait fixing and eventual release. But also then we'll be using that SNP technology to look at how the varieties are doing in the field. That's called phenotyping, looking at their observable traits, and matching it to their genotyping. That's where we peek inside the DNA using this SNP technology, and we match up traits and performance with genetic markers. And then we can kind of go back to the large populations that we have, and we can look for individuals that have the combinations of SNPs that are associated with those traits we want, and we can select them for making new crosses. It's basically just saves you a bunch of time. So instead of having to wait for the plant to grow up 3 years, 5 years to produce a harvest, and looking at it with your eyes and seeing that looks good, I'll use it to make my next cross. You can look at a little baby plant that's only 6 weeks old. You can look inside and see, does it have the SNPs associated with the trait that we're interested in? Great. We'll take that plant, even if it doesn't look particularly good. We feel pretty sure that it's worth considering. And so we'll take it, we'll make new crosses with it, and then we'll see what happens. It just speeds up the process of what they call genetic gain. So the main difference, they're both multi-environment trials. That's a really critical similarity, but the main difference is existing commercially available varieties versus populations that we're going to be continuously improving over time. And I think I'm going to leave it there because we have a couple of just fun announcements, exciting announcements that Alexa is going to take us through for our last couple of minutes.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many familiar names and friends listening into our Think and Drink today. My name is Alexa Heinecke. I am our Corporate Partnership Manager at WCR, and I have 3 announcements to share with you as we wrap up our time today. So the first of these are, we are honored to be part of a special new release of mugs by our friends at Mir, which feature the incredible artwork of Lucy T. Smith and Micah Buccino. So these are available wholesale for our member companies in the US, UK, and Europe, but they have a pre-order deadline of October 31st. So please contact us immediately for a wholesale catalog and sell sheet, and you can see the chat box for our emails. Otherwise, if you're keen to order one of these beautiful and fun mugs for yourself, stay tuned. Watch our social media channels in the next couple months to see who has stocked these in their cafes or online storefronts. My second announcement is that WCR is a new nonprofit partner of 1% for the Planet. For those of you who aren't familiar, 1% is a global organization that exists to ensure our planet and future generations thrive. So what this means is that the network of thousands of participating businesses commit to donating 1% of their annual sales to environmental causes. We really applaud this commitment by some of our member companies, and we want you to know that your WCR contributions now count toward this 1% commitment. So please get in touch if you need any additional documentation. And then last, but certainly not least, you are likely to know that WCR has transitioned to a new membership structure, which will take effect January 1st. We are asking that all companies formally renew their membership through an online application. Now, this is something that we haven't done in the past, but it should only take 5, at most 10 minutes. Membership will not automatically roll forward in 2022 unless you sign up. If you have any questions whatsoever about the fee structure, member benefits, or the renewal form, please do not hesitate to contact Maud Nicolai or myself. Our email addresses are right here, and we would love to talk with you. So that wraps up my announcements. Hanna, do you have any final concluding remarks?
No, just want to thank everybody for coming today and for being with us as always. We really, really, really appreciate it. I'm just going to drop the information into the chat about those mugs for anybody who's interested. And of course, you can see the link for the membership renewal form at the top of the chat box. We really appreciate it. Please feel free to send us any feedback that you have, or if you have questions that didn't get answered in the presentation today, or just that you didn't have a chance to ask, please let us know. We're always really happy to answer your questions. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you in Boston in 2022.